Hi, I'm Alex Karlins. United States Special Operations Command is made up of certain groups in the military. These groups are the U.S. Navy SEALs, the U.S. Special Forces, 20 units in the Marines, and certain units in the Air Force. These different units in the military are considered elite. Elite means they're superior to every one of the different forces in the military. The military is a vast group of people in the United States that protect the country. I've been someone who has been supporting the United States military for quite some time now. It's been 8 years now that I've been the commander-in-chief of the military. I've been overseeing a lot of missions, or you could call them operations, that are conducted abroad by the military in other countries to support the United States of America and to address any sort of problem we're having with another country, or to imply any action that needs to be taken against any other country or any war that we start to protect and serve the United States of America. This sort of action takes place in areas that are overrun by terrorism. We have conducted operations in places like Korea, Vietnam, and the Middle East, as well as the Persian Gulf and Somalia. And I have written a book called United States Special Operations Command, Their Stories. This book describes a number of different missions or operations conducted by SOCOM, which is U.S. Special Operations Command, which are the Navy SEALs, the Special Forces, 20 units in the Marines, as well as units in the Air Force. And it describes these groups going into war and protecting the United States of America in places like Vietnam, Korea, the Middle East, the Persian Gulf, and Somalia, and describes in detail, elaborately, different operations that we conducted. And it's actually historical fiction, so it's not accurate to the point of being nonfiction, but it's a elaborate description of what goes on in war, and it is very descriptive, which means that it describes situations that go on in war in a way that is accurate, and they're just not exact descriptions of different missions or operations that actually went on and were conducted by the United States military. However, they're a fictional approach to describing different missions that actually went on in the United States military abroad in other countries throughout the world. I wanted people to get some idea of what SOCOM was about, which SOCOM again is U.S. Special Operations Command, which consists of the U.S. Navy SEALs, the U.S. Special Forces, which the U.S. Special Forces consists of the Green Berets, the U.S. Army Rangers, and the Airborne Rangers. And then there's 20 units that are Marine battalions in the Marine Corps, that these 20 units are part of SOCOM, U.S. Special Operations Command. And then there's units in the Air Force that are also part of SOCOM, U.S. Special Operations Command. And like I said, my book is called United States Special Operations Command, Their Stories. And my book is a fictional account of a historic nature that describes different operations all over the world, in Vietnam mainly, and also in the Middle East, as well as in the Persian Gulf and Somalia and Korea as well. And it is really a magnificent account of these sorts of incidences going on abroad in other countries. And it gives you an idea of exactly how intense these battles are, and gives you an idea of what war is like and what different actions are like when taken upon different concepts that allow you to understand the reality of what war is like and what different military actions are like. And actually, the Vietnam War was considered a military action at first before it was considered the Vietnam War. We went in and it was originally just a military action that was taking place to protect the French that were fighting in Vietnam when we took over for the French in Vietnam, and it became the Vietnam War after it was solely a military action to begin with. A military action is not an actual war. It's an action that has not been declared a war yet. And after a war is declared a war, it's a much bigger event, and it's a much more drastic approach, and we put in more men than we normally would put in a military action. And, I really wanted to bring to terms what war was like in this book, and I described different wars that, of course, the Vietnam War was a military action at first, but became a war. And the rest of the wars I mentioned were full-blown wars from the start, like the war in the Middle East, which we fought for 20 years. It went on for 20 years. And that war was a war from the start. It was the war on terror. And it was implemented by George W. Bush to begin with, and was followed through by people on TV that were acting as President of the United States on television, who continued to represent the country and to give some sort of declaration of what needed to happen in war in other countries. And they were just sending in hundreds of thousands of troops into the Middle East for what I thought was not a necessary means of supporting our troops, as they all died there. Unfortunately, that's what can happen in war anyway, but we'd rather not lose that many people at a time. It was just decisions that were being made by actors on television that caused us to lose half the military. And that was not necessary and didn't need to take place when there was no actual investigation that was taken to even find out who was behind the attack on the Twin Towers, where people leveled the Twin Towers with 2 jets. It happened so quickly that I don't know that it was investigated properly when George W. Bush blamed Osama bin Laden for the attack on the Twin Towers, when I don't know how he could have possibly even known who actually did it that quickly. I think he had just heard of Osama bin Laden and wanted to blame him for it because the Bushes never liked the Middle East to begin with, and were always trying to start war with the Middle East with different military actions before the war on terror. And that's how dangerous that war was to the country, that it sent the Middle East into the United States of America, and they were conducting their own operations and their own missions in the United States and putting our country in danger with terrorist attacks all over the United States that were being conducted because the Middle East was angry with the United States of America for us going to war with the Middle East, and they were just killing us dead in the Middle East with the way they fought war on their own terrain in the Middle East, which we weren't familiar with their terrain in the Middle East. When we send troops into another country, we're not always familiar with their territory or their terrain. We don't always know what it's like to fight a battle on their grounds. So it's always possible that we might not win when we're not used to fighting a war in their territory. And that's what was going on in the Middle East. And they just kept on dumping troops into the Middle East, no matter how many people we lost. And I'm not sure they even had the authority to do that when they weren't working for the actual White House, when they were just working for the television stations. And that's what I concluded with what a lot of actors were doing on TV when they were actors who were pretending to be the President of the United States on television, and they weren't the President of the United States. And I know about it firsthand because I know who I am to the White House and know who I am to the country and know that I'm the actual person that's in charge of the country, that's in charge of the White House, and know that anyone on TV that declares they're president that is just an actor on TV that has 8 different people a day acting like the President of the United States, that are all playing the role of the President of the United States on TV. If they're not employed by the White House, they're not the President. And none of them were employed by the White House. They were just actors on TV who were controlling the whole country over the television stations, because people all over the world watch our television stations. They're able to tune into our television all over the world, and they see who are supposed to be our leaders on TV acting like the President of the United States on television, and they think they're the actual President of the United States who's saying what they're saying and starting conflicts with other countries constantly, and they get angry with America over it. And they shouldn't be angry with America. They should just be angry with the actor who's pretending he's President of the United States. But my book can be found only on Amazon's website at Amazon.com. AMAZON.com. AMAZON.com is where it's found. Amazon.com. So go to Amazon.com and look up Alex Karlins under books, and you'll find my book.